Hi, welcome. My name is Tim Wagon for MCTV Channel 15, a division of the Avalon Foundation. I am here today with Dr. Roger Woolger of Woolger International, and we're usually, when groups come in, they're pitching a event that they have, and that happens to be the case with Dr. Woolger. However, there's only 12 tickets left to this event, so and there'll be a number that'll flash in a place that you can, or a website that you can get them. It's happening at the Academy Art Museum, February 25th, Thursday night. Dr. Woolger, welcome. Thanks for coming in.
Nice to be here.
The name of the lecture is?
Beyond Death, Does Consciousness Survive?
Okay. It's a very captivating title. It's an incredibly captivating title. We're going to get into that, Doctor, but first I think we should give some background.
Sure.
Where are you from, and how'd you grow up? And that sort of thing?
I grew up in England. I was educated at a little school in the Midlands, and I went to college at the famous Oxford University, where I studied psychology and philosophy. And later, after a stint of teaching in West Africa, I did some more graduate study in comparative religion, got very interested in the whole business of mystical experience, ecstatic experience, mystics and...
Ecstatic experience? What can you explain?
Well, like Saint Teresa had an experience where she went out of her body and encountered Jesus, for example. That's considered an ecstasy. Shamans in many cultures, they take either a drug or they beat drums, and they have this experience of going into another reality and meeting spirits, meeting the dead and things like that. We call that shamanic journeying. But it's all part of the what we call the phenomena of religious experience. Not religious belief, that's very different. I'm not very interested in belief because that's mental, but these are real experiences.
Okay. Now, Doctor, we are here, I run a television station, I work for the theater, we're bankers, we're bakers, now your specialty seems very special and very specific. How much of your sort of investigating is going, what percentage of the population is sort of doing that type of investigation? Are they, shamanic, ecstatic, that sort of thing? I mean, how does it relate to, you're investigating obviously important stuff, how does it relate to the people who are chugging through, so to speak?
Well, it's relatively small. It's a minority, but since the 60s, in the last 50 years, there's been much more interest in Eastern religion, yoga, meditation, and inevitably that's led people to look at other religions and also the practices. And I would say the last 30 years, there's been a huge interest in Native American, what you call medicine men and their practices, and tribal religions. Many people go down to Brazil and South America and study shamans with places like Machu Picchu. And they're teaching us a lot about what religion was like before Christianity and Buddhism, what we might call tribal religion. And we're starting to see that there are things that these indigenous religions, tribal religions, have in common with what's been practiced in the West. So, for example, in the 19th century, one of the areas I've studied a bit, there was a huge interest in what we call spiritualism. Mediums who go into trance and channel their ancestors or channel some guide. There's been a huge revival of this in the West, particularly in America, since the 60s. But the big opening to working with the spirit world was the spiritualists of the 19th century. And at the same time, there was a huge new interest in Eastern religions in the 19th century, associated with the great teacher Madame Blavatsky, who founded a movement called Theosophy, which is a mixture of Hindu teachings, Buddhist teachings, a little from China, a kind of universal spiritual teachings from other religions. So this current has been there in the West, and it finally kind of expands, I would say, in the 60s with the huge interest in, of course, as well as interest in meditation, whether you approve of it or not, there was a huge interest in drugs in the 60s. And many people stumbled upon LSD, and they found that they had the same experiences as the shamans and the mystics. In other words, the altered states of consciousness that you get either from meditating, listening to hypnotic drumming, hypnosis, or taking a psychedelic substance, the experiences are very similar. And what I've been studying this for many years, we're starting to learn that these other worlds that people visit in their other states of consciousness, these visionary worlds, are real in themselves. They're not, quote, just imagination or fantasy.
Are you studying the brain? Are you just...
More recently, people have come to study the brain, and actually they can't find very much in the brain to correspond to it, because the closest they've gotten is the pineal gland, which is light sensitive. It's also sensitive to your aging cycle. They discovered that there is a transmitter in the pineal gland called serotonin, which is very similar to the structure of LSD. And so it's been speculated in traditional or esoteric psychology. They talk about the third eye, the vision, the eye that the mystic or the yogi has, where he can see gods and spirits and other realities. And apparently that third eye corresponds to the pineal. And if you stimulate it with certain drugs, you open this sensitivity to light.
Okay, okay. Now, real quick before we get in maybe to the lecture.
Yeah.
Did you expect as a young child that this is, did you, you majored in psychology and that sort of thing. Was this where you wanted to go, or did you let psychology take you where you wanted to go?
Well, to be honest, I mean, I grew up in England, okay? And I was always fascinated by the stories that were around locally about haunted houses. I was interested in ghosts as a kid.
Right.
And I was always trying to find some house with a ghost, but I never succeeded. Used to hear stories. And I read a lot about it. And when I was in my teenage, I discovered that there was a whole area where the so-called scientists had studied spirits and mediums and all that stuff about do we survive after. They called it parapsychology. So I read lots of books when I was a teenager on parapsychology, and I talked to different people. And then I discovered, as well as parapsychology, there was something called psychology. I didn't know about psychology at that time. Yeah. And I thought, well, it might be a good starting point. So that got me going in my first degrees. But I was always interested in the ghost stuff.
Great.
And more recently, I've sort of gone full circle and come back to looking at that, but with new eyes, you know. Right. What are ghosts? What are spirits? What is it that hangs around a haunted house? What is it? And many people feel when they go to battlefields in Europe, or Civil War battlefields, they feel heavy. They feel sad. Well, the parapsychologists would say because there are energies there that belong to the past. They're spirit energies, still saturating the battlefield or running around a haunted house. I mean, Hollywood takes this theme up. That film we mentioned in discussion, Nicole Kidman's The Others or something like that, about spirits who come back to a house and don't know they're dead. It's quite a common phenomenon. Right. And we've had one of my assistants, actually, who lives not very far from here, quite sensitive. She could almost be called a psychic. And she went to visit one of the Civil War battlefields not so very far from here. And she came back after it, not thinking about it, and felt very uncomfortable in her house. She felt sad, she felt confused, and then she sat down and started to sort of meditate with it, and suddenly she got scenes of a Civil War battlefield, and she had the sense that she had spirits come home with her from the battlefield who were still lost after that battle. So these are phenomena. They're very hard to prove what exactly is happening, but when you show very strong connections between a place and an experience of spirit, you start to wonder whether spirits in fact hang around places where they have died. Right. And more I'm coming to that conclusion. There's truth in that. It doesn't answer the question of what a spirit is, but something hangs around. Energy, thought forms, we don't know.
Okay, we're going to be right back to talk about that. We're going to take a quick break, and I'm going to inform Dr. Woolger about the ghost that's in the Avalon. We'll be back in just a few more minutes.
You've got a ghost?
Yes.